Space, the final frontier. These are the podcasts of the Starfleet Night Shift, our continuing mission to discuss strange new worlds, TM, to review Star Trek in all its iterations, to boldly talk about Trek we've all seen before.
Before.
Before. Welcome, everyone, back to the Star Trek Night Shift podcast. It's been a super long time. There has been so much going on, so many things to talk about. Maybe the single most, I don't know, polarizing season of a Star Trek that I've ever been a part of myself. There's certainly more to talk about, more to debate about than I've ever seen in a Star Trek as it was going live. So this is super fascinating for me. I'm really excited to get back into this. Joined today by none other than Commander Jennifer and Science Officer Azure. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. So we're just going to be reviewing the season in its entirety of Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2. There was a lot of excitement leading up to this, a lot of excitement throughout, and then, a lot of raised eyebrows, a lot of grumpiness. I'm going to turn over the hosting of this to Commander Jennifer, who will sort of lead us from here boldly, where no Jennifer has led before.
Well, thank you, Captain Merrick. So, as we've gone into season 2 of Strange New Worlds, there's a lot of new, interesting things to talk about. How about we start with a simple question of what was your favorite episode? Azure, would you like to go first?
Sure. Although I don't think this is actually a particularly simple question.
No, it isn't.
For me, um, my problem is the definition of favorite because I like several of them for very different reasons. And like most enjoyable versus most moving versus most engaging versus I don't know other
Oh, yes.
mosts. So if I had to just narrow it down to favorite, I'm gonna cheat and pick two that are close to tied.
Whoa.
Okay, you're right. I'm probably not allowed to do that. I should probably have to commit to one. Um,
There's a
mm,
phaser on kill to your head at this moment.
oh God.
Favorite
There
episode.
are four lights. Um, oh man. All right. So, this is the other one. I'm going to give two quick disclaimers. One, Merrick and I have talked very little about most of these episodes, so that's why I'm super excited to be back here recording.
Oh my
But
gosh, same.
I have also intentionally not really followed the community's response to a lot of these. So to any fans out there who vehemently disagree with me, I respect your opinion and didn't know about it until you tell me.
Oh, that's
Um,
going to make this so much fun because I mean, obviously we haven't talked, which is why this is going to be so great because you and I talk so well about these kinds of things. But I do have like a pretty good idea of like the community at large and the sort of visceral and conflicting reactions that people have had. So I'll be able to share that too. Very, very
okay.
interesting.
Then my second disclaimer, which will probably give away what I'm about to pick as my tied for but picking as favorite episode, is that I grew up a huge theater nerd and was in and loved a lot of musicals. And I'm actually going to pick episode 9, Subspace Rhapsody, as my favorite episode of the season.
Subspace Rhapsody. Okay, well, since that was brought to that, we can't not have this discussion because this is singularly, Azure, the most polarizing episode of Star Trek I have ever seen. I would put it up against like the finale of any season, the death of Spock. I don't care what it
Wow.
is, okay? The internet went insane.
Well,
The
I will say
amount of
this is the one episode where I had any idea of it, and it's only because you, in realizing that I still hadn't seen it, you said I need you to see it because it's been really polarizing. That's all I know.
yes, well, and that it has been. Even in our own community, even with people that I thought I would have been able to predict their response to this show, I have been dramatically wrong. Not even just in people that I thought would like it, but hated it. but also in people that I thought would hate it that liked it. It's almost just something so new and different, something that okay, so like a lot of the reactions that we've seen on Twitter have been such that one person will say, "Oh, it's the best thing ever." The next person will say, you know, there's this greater, bigger, larger movement of "That's not my Star Trek," right? Like that's been like a theme, I think, for a lot of the modern Trek. That there's like a body of people who sort
Which
of
I've been part
represent
of
that.
for some shows.
Absolutely, and I have been too. I don't even mean when I said that just then, I shook my own fist in the air because I definitely felt uh, that was true in a lot of in a lot of cases. And then there's been an equal reaction from people going, "Oh yeah, that's so unheard of for music to be in Star Trek." And then they link like 10 episodes that had music, or like, "Oh, this is so weird for them to go so far afield in some sort of bizarre themed." Episode that has nothing to do with science fiction, and then some other guy will go, "Yeah, yeah, so unlike Star Trek to do that," and then show like the mobster episodes, all sorts of things that were themed episodes.
Well,
So it's been really polarizing.
what I found surprising about this is I'm curious as to the people who found it so distressing, what Star Trek they're comparing it to, where they were not aware of all of these moments in Star Trek. Like, which Star Trek are they watching that this was such a huge deal for them? I'm actually really surprised that people are saying, oh, this isn't my Star Trek, because putting a musical number into a show seems really low down on the list of world breaking episodes.
So since Merrick told me it was so polarizing, I've wondered that. And my guess, if I had to make one, and again, this is a completely naive, uninformed guess, is that it was a musical episode, not an episode with a music number in it. But I don't
Which
know.
is, yeah, I mean, it's definitely true. They fully committed to this theme. In fact, I would make a broader argument about Strange New Worlds in general, that they are more willing to commit to abstract themes that aren't exactly in line with, the previous episode, let alone the entire season or series, that because Strange New Worlds is so uniquely episodic. And I say uniquely only because it's
Yeah,
unique in
compared to
modern
recent.
television, right? Yeah. And
Yeah.
in classic Trek, in classic Trek and classic television, that's actually a completely reasonable thing. Whatever happens in an episode, by the end of the episode, you hit the reset button and everything kind of goes back to, starting on the bridge as if nothing happened the following week. But with Strange New Worlds, it is a dramatic departure from not just current Star Trek, but also of current storytelling as a whole. That what they're really aiming for, and this is again subjective, it's my opinion, but it feels to me like they're aiming for result, for setting, rather than the groundwork needed to get them towards that setting. Like, I want to see this fun scenario. And they don't really need a ton of investment in building up the grounds for that scenario. They just get the scenario. So, like, if you look at the musical episode, it is very far-fetched in terms of science fiction. The science reasoning behind it, right? The the origin of whatever the circumstances were that allowed this crazy thing to happen make practically no sense. And for those of us who really enjoyed the episode, which by the way, I do. Sorry, I haven't said this yet, but I actually love
Yeah, I've been
the
waiting to find
episode.
out.
No, because Azure and I have not discussed this at all. I went into this episode so nervous because they release previews a week ahead of time for the following episode. Now, I never watch them. I don't like to do that. I like to be surprised. I like to really experience it as in my opinion, it's meant to be experienced. I don't really want to be forming an opinion before the episode airs, but it sort of created such a strong, tangible, visceral reaction among every Star Trek fan, even just the trailer, even just knowing what it was going to be, that it was impossible for it to not reach me ahead of time. And I knew a bunch of people that I know, like, respect, who were really dreading this episode. And I found myself going into it incredibly apprehensive. I was already not, I assume Jennifer's going to get to a point where she's going to ask us our least favorite episode. And I had a rather traumatizing experience with an episode this season, which I have not yet had in Star Trek, Strange New Worlds. So I was sort of found myself preparing, like clenching, like for something really bad. And as the episode went on, and they brought up the circumstances that created this situation where they were in a musical, just seemed kind of silly. It took the whole episode for it to win me over, but it did so song by song by song. It just got better and better and better. And I loved this, just like in so many other episodes of Stranger Worlds, I loved the setting so much that I didn't care that it was walking on really flimsy stilts that got it there. You know what I'm saying?
I
It
do
was
know what
just
you're
an interesting
saying.
thing.
And to anyone who doesn't take that point of view and thinks that the stilts really were too flimsy, I'll say that there's a ton of good Trek out there where if you really think too much about the science, it falls apart. So like I would encourage anyone to just take a little bit of a leap of faith with this episode and accept that yes, it's it's the oh god, I'm going to forget the exact phrase. The quantum probability field that starts expanding, which is weird. And in fact, the one enraging part for me was Pelia's suggestion about what made music unique, because as Jennifer and Merrick know, I do sound research, and her point is applies to every sort of sound, not just music. Anyway,
Not just music.
um, so that was ridiculous. But I'm fine with I'm fine with like going out for a walk with them on this and just accepting like sure the sciencey background is flimsy, and like you, Merrick, I was actually very scared after like the finding out the name of the episode and reading a brief description as I went into it. But I was actually won over as soon as the opening was in a cappella.
Oh my gosh, can we acknowledge how great it was that they did that? Because when we were talking about it in our watch party in our Discord beforehand, we said something to that effect. I was like, I wish that the intro would be sung. And then it
Yep.
came in with the acapella, which blew everyone's mind. It was like those old scientists with the animated intro. I just
Opening,
feel like
yeah. Oh
they
wait,
are
which
having
let's not
so
get
much
too far into
fun.
it.
Yeah, exactly, because that's going to be another thing. But they're just you can just tell we've talked about this at great length before, Azure. Like a lot of
Yeah.
the criteria that I have for really loving a Star Trek is at the end of the day, whether they're being assimilated by the Borg or blown up by Cardassians or they're just some other terrible thing is happening to Miles O'Brien, it doesn't matter. At the end of the episode, I'm like, I love these guys. They're like a family, and I want to be a part of that family. That is such a
Yeah.
tangible experience for all of classic Trek. And while I'm still working on that for Strange New Worlds, and it's doing phenomenally, I'm still working on it, the cast, crew, and producers and set designers and just every person behind the scenes in that show just have got to be having the most fun of any
Yeah.
Star Trek crew that has ever been because
It
they're
was
just enjoying the hell out of it.
it was so reminiscent for me of seeing some of the actors portray their roles in the Elysian Kingdom from season one.
Oh yes. Oh
Like you could
yes.
just tell that they like at least the ones who were having a good time were having a really good time.
Oh gosh. Ethan Peck, Hammer was having a blast. You could tell. I mean, there were people that just were living that up, and it was so amazing. Now, I want to get on to another topic, but before we go, I do like you, Azure. I want to acknowledge the people that don't agree because Azure and I don't always agree, and we always disagree really amiably, and I love that about our discussions. This one we do agree on, but I do want to acknowledge that what we talked about and the reason why I could see that, that there was an issue. Maybe people just don't like musicals. That's a completely valid thing. If you just don't like that format, it's fine. But the flimsy scientific premise is a thing that I feel and you feel like should be able to be let go of, at least in readily at certain times in good faith. Just let go of that and have fun. But I would say that it probably speaks to something that is a consistent or a constant throughout Strange New Worlds. I think even though it hasn't killed it for me, it is a very valid um, criticism to lobby against the series, and that is that while Strange New Worlds is really in a beautiful situation, a beautiful place to be able to experiment in their incredibly episodic storytelling, and they've done so. We've seen really dramatic swings in tone and theme from episode to episode. But I have felt in the last 2 seasons that they have done really well with some of the more sort of intense things. I actually personally don't think that the Gorn episodes are the best expression of this. That's sort of like space monster thing, and that's fine. But that's intensity. I think episodes like the Balance of Terror rework in season 1, maybe one of the greatest examples of that. So cool. Really like serious stuff and a big threat that they're dealing with. They do that well. And then I
I
think
agree.
Strange New Worlds has done what I would like to coin as whimsy. I don't have a better term for it. I think that they have done whimsical episodes in a way that no other Star Trek has managed to touch, that would have felt out of place or awkward in any other series, and yet they pull it off so beautifully. There's so many good examples of whimsy, like hijinks or charades from
Charades, yeah.
oh my god, charades is so good. Like there's so many, or even the book episode from last season. There are
Oh
so
yeah.
many examples, and of course those old scientists. There's a ton of examples of these, and including Subspace Rhapsody. These are all under the category of whimsy, which I have enjoyed thoroughly. But I would say that something that Star Trek as a whole, from its inception, that it was maybe best known for, even though it does whimsy and it does inspirational and it does heartwarming and family and funny and intense and all that. The thing that it might be known best for is scientific intrigue, right? Like putting a very scientific setting with a really interesting dilemma that is like mentally engaging, and they commit so dramatically to the pseudoscience, right? They commit to it, and they really go so far into it that technobabble became a language all in its own, where the audience of the show knew the pseudoscience, even though it was pseudoscience, so well that they were able to follow, track, understand, and even predict solutions to or reactions to some of these weird scientific things. And I think that that's actually like a very important element of Star Trek in general that has I think it has objectively has diminished in that aspect throughout all of modern Trek.
I'm gonna need a second to think about that before I have an actual response. I mean, one, hold on. I have one immediate response. Yeah, I think you're right. Um, I can't, and I
I love those
understand,
responses.
and like you said, in an attempt to acknowledge people who will likely disagree with me, I think that's a reasonable criticism as well. What I can't decide is, I don't know that I think that's a bad thing.
Fair, very fair. That is, of
Because
course,
when you get
completely
too
subjective.
far into committing to the technobabble type pseudoscience, when it ends up not being internally consistent on very rare occasions, you get to questions like, when you transport, are you a new person, Merrick? Sorry, this is an
Stop that
inside
right
joke.
now.
It's not even an inside joke. I'm sure many Star Trek fans will have heard of this very popular debate, but there was a discussion in Discord long before the podcast that got incredibly out of hand based on this question.
Listen, we Star Trek fans know, just in good company, right? You don't bring up politics, religion,
or,
transporter,
or the transporter
mechanics,
problem.
or Tuvix. Okay, if you want to stay friends with everyone in the room, you gotta know those are the 4 things that are just off the table.
That was a good distraction from my attempt at bringing the topic back up. No, I do think we should move on. Although I have plenty that I would love to say about this episode in the long run. But honestly, we're gonna have that with every episode. But I'm the only one who's answered Chief Jennifer's opening question so far, so I'd love to hear the two of your favorite episodes.
Oh, right before that, just because
Oh,
this is kind of connected to this, I know you brought up the fact that it's lacking in technobabble, and the consistency of that. But I've tried to think about, and I love Strange New Worlds, and I do love its whimsical nature, and I actually think that that really connects it to the original series in a way that's respectful of what the original series is and
Ah,
was. And I think it
ooh,
really kind of fits in there in a pretty decent way, that I'm pretty happy with. However, I have noticed that most of New Trek, specifically, I guess, Discovery and even Picard to a certain extent, um, doesn't have the aspects that Next Gen, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager had, where during or after an episode, it sparked a very deep philosophical discussion, or was
Oh.
incredibly moving, and or brought up a moral conundrum that was intricate and complex and had a lot of gray area, and that really allowed for two people who had just watched that episode to really delve into it and have a long, complex, and nuanced discussion afterwards. And that is something that I just have not had from Discovery or Picard. Or, to be fair, as much as I love Strange New Worlds hasn't really ignited that either. What do you guys feel about that?
I'm gonna jump in because I imagine Merrick will have a lot to say about this, or at least a
What?
longer
How do you
version than I
know?
have. I could say that about nearly any topic about Trek.
Hey, whoa. I
Not in
resemble that
not
remark.
a bad way. Um, but I would say first of all, Chief Jennifer. I don't know. I can't say your first name without saying Chief in front of it. I
This is
think
now
your
just
point
command.
about Strange New Worlds connecting with the original like vision for the original series is a super good point that I would have never made that connection on my own. That like the lower amount of technobabble is really kind of consistent with the show that it is the prequel to, which is interesting. But I will agree. I have gotten less. I have gotten almost none of that out of Picard and Discovery. The sort of like I want to sit here and discuss this issue in depth with someone, largely because those shows kind of slap you in the face with the view that they have, and sometimes that's fine. I've gotten it a little bit from Strange New Worlds, and I think we'll get into some of that later in this discussion. But I do agree that it's less than I had with Picard, or sorry, than with Next Generation, DS9, and Voyager. So I think you have a good point that I pretty wholeheartedly agree with.
I agree completely. I think those are both excellent points, and I am really glad that you brought them up because Jennifer very often represents the perspective of the original series because that's the one she grew up with. I think that's not the case for Azure and myself and a lot of the Trekkies that we talk to. I always value Jennifer's perspective because she really comes from a different generation of Star Trek. By the way, we're the same age. She just grew up watching the original series when I grew up in the golden era, the sort of like TNG, DS9, Voyager, Enterprise. So I think that's actually true, and you have to imagine that the people that are making the show are keenly aware of the very tight little window of time frame that they're in, that they're occupying. They are literally overlapping the original series characters. They have to play with this constantly. This sort of how true are we to the original series? How much are we hurting it, helping it, breaking away from it? They certainly saw a number of very emotional reactions from people responding to even Discovery and its time frame that it was in. In fact, so much so that we, the angry masses, spooked them thousands of years in the future. I mean, like they had to get away from the time frame
That's
that they
how
were
time
in.
travel works.
Yeah,
You just got to scare people into the
you got to
future.
scare them because they literally like the reaction was too strong. It was really negative. I really felt like they had such a tight leash because of where they were. Strange New Worlds deciding to dedicate themselves with the characters that they did, the ship that they have, the setting that they're in. They can't leave. They are really committed to this, and so of course that they have that in their mind. I have not thought about its adherence to any sort of tone from the original series as an intentional design aspect, but how could it not be? I think that's actually a very good point. But to the second point where I can sort of speak on it more, I love that you said that because I've not really put that up in my comparisons with this show. If I look at Strange New Worlds, like compared to the other modern shows of the era, right? We have Discovery and Picard, both with huge glaring problems and a really divided fan base and all these things. Strange New Worlds has seemed to me like a very intentional, willful compromise with the two sort of disparate fan bases that Star Trek has. This sort of modern Trek fan versus old classic Trek fan. And if anyone is listening to this podcast and is not aware that that dichotomy exists, please allow me to introduce you to the Star Trek fandom. It is real. It is very severe. In fact, I often think that the producers, directors, studios behind Star Trek were stunned, which I think is the perfect word for a Star Trek reaction. But they got stunned by the fact that that Star Trek fans, by and large, were not just a giant clump that could be immediately attributed to any new, fancy, shiny, progressive Star Trek show. That was not the case. There was a very clear delineation between people that liked the modern and people that are really angry that they were no longer being catered to with the franchise that they've known and loved for 55 plus years. So this is like a real thing. But I have found myself loving Strange New Worlds at the center of it all, right? With Discovery and Picard being their own, having their own issues on the side. Strange New Worlds has seemed a wonderful compromise to me, but I have not yet applied what you just said, Jennifer. And I've been writing reviews in our Discord for random episodes of Star Trek that I've been watching recently, and have found that is like a really important aspect of what Star Trek means to me is that sort of like morality tale that leaves room for amazing discussion, or a philosophical dilemma that leaves a thread at the end for you to really explore. Jennifer and I, being married and having gone through Star Trek together when we got married, really got to explore this ourselves. We had some of the best talks we've ever had and continue to have to this day come from various episodes of Star Trek. And it may not even be the episodes that you think. It's not always the Inner Light or Darmok and Jalad. It may not be, the By the Pale Moonlight or all these big episodes that everybody thinks of. It may not be those. It could be Worf being paralyzed by a barrel. Okay? Like sometimes it's these weird episodes, but Star Trek does such a good job of posing a question, exploring a lot of sides of it, and then sort of leaving you to think about it. We've talked at length about this, Azure, in the past, where because you and I watch and rewatch the various, series of Star Trek over and over again. There are certain episodes that have that gray area that I find myself feeling slightly different about every single time I watch them. There are so many nuances to that. They don't force the audience to feel right or wrong about it. They don't tell you how to feel. And the Worf getting hit by a barrel episode, no one's favorite episode. No one's favorite. That is not a fun episode to watch. And yet the sort of morality of helping a friend, of listening to someone else's cultural views, respecting someone else's wishes upon death, about everyone's individual right to feel selfish about losing a friend or their role that they play in the death of a loved one. There's so many sides explored by that, with a bunch of different people representing different views on that ship, and they never make you feel any particular way about it. They give you all the options, they let you think about it. And I ended up not just having an hour-long discussion with my wife about it afterwards, not just writing a review for the episode, but getting into like a very thoughtful debate and discussion in our Discord that lasted, like a full day or something. Like, those are the moments that I love. And while I adore Strange New Worlds, and I do, I think, Jennifer, I've never thought about it before, but I think you're right. I just right now, I scanned over every episode of the original of Strange New Worlds, and there are one or two that have them for sure, and one this season that we're gonna have to get into. But by and large, it is a different tone. That sort of thing that you're talking about is not as present, and I think that's worth noting. So we are gonna move on, but do you want me to pick my favorite episode next, Jennifer, or you?
I don't mind picking my favorite episode from this season. However, I am thinking it might be the same as yours.
Well, please, by all means.
So in the same vein as just enjoying what Strange New Worlds brings to the table, and the part of it that does connect to the original series that I really enjoy, I will choose Charades from my favorite episode. I feel like that it connected to an episode I love from TOS. It did it in such a wonderful way. The writing was fantastic. The actors delivered the lines wonderfully. It
Ethan
was
Peck
such
deserves an award.
it was such a joy to watch, and probably out of all the episodes, I feel like it is probably one of them that could have so easily fit into the original series, that time period and all of what that meant. And it was thoroughly, though, enjoyable as a modern show. So I'm picking that one.
How dare you pick my No, I'm just kidding. Charades is, and I remember saying this to Azure, I think, it's the spiritual successor to hijinks, to Spock Amok from the previous season, in which I have to admit, when I first watched Spock Amok in season 1, I loved it so dearly. I found myself laughing out loud, cheering at these hysterical, playful moments, getting to see Spock, who, again, Ethan Peck he is just perfectly embodying every single thing that I personally want from what I would consider a good term to call adolescent Spock. It's really what it feels like. Ethan Peck is not an adolescent, but he represents this young, youthful, boyish, clumsy, socially clumsy Spock, experimenting Spock, right? He's experimenting with his role as in leadership, with his sort of like the conflicting sides of himself with being human or Vulcan, with his emotions at all, with romantic relationships. He really is like the adolescent form of Spock. And I know that there's a lot of people that hold him to a really, really strict, a really strict guideline for what they believe that Spock should be. And I don't blame them for that. Although I would love to do an entire podcast on what it means to be Vulcan and why Spock really explores the full range of that in his entire life. My favorite thing ever is the quote from Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, where he says in his old age that logic is the beginning of wisdom, not the end of it. I mean, it's the greatest line, and that one line alone could really spark an entire paper on volcanism, really. But I really think that he really embodies this wonderful, playful character in this show, and it comes back with such hilarity in charades. Everyone did a great job. Pike, in just giving goofy expressions in the background, was just killing it. I mean, we were laughing, rolling on the floor with this. T'Pring's dad, best Vulcan of all time award, maybe. I just love that guy. I thought he was just the best.
I loved he enjoyed the food until his wife didn't said
Every
it wasn't
time.
good enough.
Yeah, he had some sort of like actual positive reaction to something, and then looked at the wife, who of course, and then even in T'Pring, which by the way, another wonderful character and theme to explore is what T'Pring means in Star Trek to Spock in the original series, and then the juxtaposition to Strange New Worlds, what she is in here. I feel like Strange New Worlds and T'Pring and the episode of Charades, since that's what we're talking about here, it really, and I was mentioning this the other day, I believe that they have walked this really fine tightrope on trying to respect and not conflict with the original series, as Jennifer said a moment ago. But they, in my opinion, in so many of these things where you would immediately go, oh my gosh, how dare you even bring that up? That's too close. We know what happens, like T'Pring, really? Are you going to do that? Like, she was a single episode character in the original series, was literally awful, right? Like, caused all of this drama. And we know the relationship between Chapel and Spock going forward in the original series, what it ends up being, what it doesn't end up being, more importantly. And yet, I feel like they're doing this so well that they're not conflicting or destroying previous canon, but instead adding context to it that, like, if I would have really taken it as canon, if I was not protective or defensive about the original series or future iterations of Star Trek at all, or not future iterations, but, in the future of the current show in universe, I would literally, if I thought this was just canon and what happened beforehand, it would really just beautifully inform what I would find out later in the original series. It really doesn't feel like it's doing anything but adding beautiful context to it. And episodes like Charades just drive that home so well. I love all those interactions and relationships. They're just too much fun.
That's a good point, because I also felt that way with the first season. There were some episodes there where I said, "Oh, they're going there, and how are they going to make that work?" Because I didn't see it. And then as more episodes have been coming out, especially these episodes in season 2, I am seeing how it works and how it's not conflicting and how it does just add. And I didn't see how they were going to get from point A to point B, but as each new episode comes out and each new scene between these characters comes out, I'm starting to see how they're actually going to get to the end in the original series.
And as someone who has not watched a lot of the original series, but I have specifically gone to look up the episodes that are relevant for Strange New World stuff, and like watched them. I totally agree. I think with my slightly less protective view of the original series, I especially embrace Merrick's point of it really does feel like this provides not just context, but like relevant and potentially like explanatory context, which worked out really well. And I hate to be this person because I usually try to be very upbeat about my Star Trek interpretations, but that flies right in the face of how Discovery worked out, where we had to classify the entire existence of season 1 basically and season 2 to keep it consistent with the future of Trek.
Yeah, the only way that that worked, the only way that could exist in our canon universe at all was to say, okay, yeah, everyone has to pretend this never happened, and the entirety, every single character from the cast like leaves that whole timeline and goes somewhere so far that they can't mess with anything ever again. It was from a writer's perspective, from a story perspective, consistency perspective, just hysterical. I mean, just almost unbelievable in how funny that ended up being. Just such a bizarre turn of events. I always say, and I'm very sorry to everyone out there that adores Discovery, please allow me to offer an olive branch. There are some great things that come out of that show. Tilly is hilarious. It set the tone for the new updated look, cinematography, of the graphics, of the ships.
Prime Lorca.
Prime Lorca is
Prime
I
Lorca.
still argue, yes, find Prime Lorca. I still argue that Lorca would have been one of the greatest captains. I absolutely love him. I think that Grudge is phenomenal. Obviously, I love Grudge. The Guardian of Forever, maybe one of my favorite scenes in modern Star Trek. Period. I thought that was so great. There are some good things that come out of that show for sure, but honestly, the best thing to come out of that show was Strange New Worlds.
I agree. Although, and I've said this before, I enjoy season 2 of Discovery. Although, admittedly, part of it is because of the cast of Strange New Worlds.
That is that's the season of Strange New Worlds.
But even if it wasn't them and it was just some other crew or captain that came to take over, that was still somehow played by Anson Mount.
Here.
I think season 2 was a good sci-fi show. I think it was not a great Star Trek like plot line.
Yeah, one of my big, like, when I try to sum up what I think about that show, like if I were to say, like, some of the problems that I had with the show, if I really wanted to just sum that up in like something that's relatable in a single sentence, I'd be like, hey, so and so, have you seen season 1 and season 2 of Discovery? And they'd be like, oh yeah, and I'd be like, all right, could you tell me what it's about?
Nope.
Nope, not at all. You could literally just have seen it. And it's so, because, I mean, in Strange New Worlds, that would be a more nuanced discussion because, and if you were to apply that to any previous Star Trek, again, with its episodic sort of format, you'd be like, yeah, it's the kind of show that does this kind of thing and does that kind of thing, but in this broad strokes. But in Discovery, it literally is a very linear, show by show, progressive serialized storytelling, right? And so you should be able to, at least on some level, explain what the show is about. But it actually suffers from, I think, what a lot of modern television shows do suffer from, which is this very odd break between seasons where they have these really lofty goals and they really don't know how long their show is going to last or how long it's going to take for them to tell a certain story. And so there are these giant disconnects between seasons or between plot lines. The most egregious, I think, was Star Trek Picard season 1 and season 2. Entirely. I mean, they have nothing to do with each other. Yeah, there's like they hit a complete reset and could pretend that everything that happened in the previous season was just didn't happen.
I mean,
which they do between season 2 and season 3 as well, in a way that I think many of us.
I mean, exactly. I would love for them to just pretend Egypt came back.
Yes.
All right, wait,
Picard will never be canon because
we can't get into that. It'll make me sad.
I don't want to cry on podcasts. Justice for Egypt. Justice for Bruce Maddox. I'll give justice for anybody. I don't like what they did.
But I do want to push us forward because if my timer here is correct, we've been going for a little under an hour now, and we're not at the end of the answer to Jennifer's first question.
I do have about 8 questions, so we'll see.
Okay. All right. So I'll move on to mine, and I have to say it. I have to be honest. My favorite episode of the season is Those Old Scientists.
That was the one that was my tie.
Of course it is. Of course it was. I spent the entirety of waiting between seasons knowing that it was coming. We all did. But the thought of this was beyond the realm of possibility. Like, if I hadn't been told it officially first, I would have never believed it. Not until
Yeah.
I saw it on screen. And I just want to say that for all of you people out there who wonder why Star Trek is so beloved or what magic it has, that makes it going, like, continue going for almost 60 years now. It is this unbelievable ability to continue to add to a persistent, consistent, expansive universe that overlaps with itself constantly. Not just the technobabble and the pseudoscience, we know it. We know what the warp coils are. We know how the Bassard collectors work. We know all of these. That we know how, like, auxiliary power and work. Like, we just have this understanding, and the characters and the races, the relationships between governments and sectors of space and wars that have happened. Like, this all overlaps, and we all love this. So one of the greatest things that ever happens in Star Trek is this beautiful crossover. It's so pertinent, and it's such a rare thing to be able to get to see something like that in mainstream popular media, to be like, this show is going overlapping with another show in its same universe, and they can cross over. And that's one of the beautiful things that happens in Star Trek. When the Next Generation started, the very first episode of the Next Generation back in the 80s, right? Like 87. It's the encounter at Farpoint, and Bones, right? McCoy gives a send-off, a beautiful send-off at the very end of the episode. It's my favorite moment in the whole episode. It's this great sort of passing of the torch. And then in the Next Generation, when Deep Space Nine starts, and the Enterprise is there, and Picard hands over the keys to the castle, basically, to Cisco. And there's an episode of Deep Space Nine on the Next Generation. And then when Voyager is about to get lost in the Delta Quadrant, it's the first episode is it bayed at DS9 and then goes off to the Badlands in search for this. And then what do they end up doing? They find Ferengi that were lost there from the Next Generation 10 years previously. You know what I mean? Like, there's
cool episode.
it's so great and speaks so well, I think, to what makes Star Trek so awesome. So the thought that we actually right now have overlapping Star Treks again, which is like, forget however you feel about each individual Star Trek, we got another era of Trek in our lifetime, which is a beautiful thing to get to explore. And the two shows that are most unanimously loved had an overlap, even though one of them was literally animated. It's just almost inconceivable that was real, that actually happened. And here is the best part.
It's also, they're also temporally set as far apart as any two Star Treks, right?
Oh, 100% true, because it is actually just like it's like 3 years or so after the return of Voyager is when is Lower Decks.
Okay.
So the Voyager's back, obviously. Tom Paris came on in one of the episodes, and this is, of course, 10 years before the original series is Strange New Worlds, which sets it somewhere in the 2250s or something. So long time. So temporally displaced. Thank you for bringing that up. Also, just completely displaced in medium. One is literally animated, and the other one is a beautiful, very high graphics, ultra HD cinematic television show. And the best part of the whole thing, not for a second did it feel like they conflicted. That episode pulled it off from top to bottom. Never did it feel forced or awkward, or did the characters in real life feel like not the characters from the animated. I mean, it just so happened that those guys, you gotta give them credit, man. The Lower Decks actors coming in, portraying themselves in live action, and just utterly crushing those roles. They were so believable in every scene. It was such a fun, whimsical romp in comedy and in Star Trek fandom, because that's what Lower Decks really is. It's a love letter to the fans, the references, the throwbacks, the freaking Enterprise love, Azure, the ENT references. I mean, it was everything you wanted from a Lower Decks episode, but in Strange New Worlds live action, and it worked completely.
Yeah, it was stunning how well that episode came across, I think.
And all of those not in my Star Trek guys, you didn't hear a peep out of them for that. It was unanimously loved. I can't think of a soul that did not adore that episode. It was just too much fun. It was everything that you want from an hour of good sci-fi television.
And Pike's just constant, like, all right, well, how much worse could it get? Like, attitude.
I also just want to give a shout out to Tawny Newsome, who plays Beckett Mariner. Because not only is that woman amazing, I adore her. I think she's so much fun. She was the one, Jennifer, who hosted the Star Trek Day events last year, which was, I don't know if you guys remember this. It was kind of a hot mess. I mean, they had a lot of issues. There were a lot of technical problems. We are Star Trek fans. We're here for it no matter what, right? I love everybody. I love all of it. It's phenomenal. But there was a lot of technical difficulties, awkward silences, bad transitions, and she carried 100% of the brunt of that. I became an instant fan of that woman, not just the character of Beckett Mariner, at Star Trek Day, because boy, did she have a lot on her shoulders, and she did it like an absolute champion. But I want to shout her out because, guys, that woman is 40 years old. She comes on as Beckett Mariner, who has like she gives off like 22 energy, right? She's got the energy of a 22-year-old or something like that. She came on in live action and just looked beautiful and young and stunning and carried that energy so perfectly. And it was just a joy to watch them do what they did. So that's my favorite for sure. I think that brought out the best in Strange New Worlds and in Lower Decks and reaffirmed two of my favorite Star Trek shows of all time in a single episode.
I honestly have nothing to add. I 100% agree with all of those points.
Let's go.
It was, I mean, we talk about how we disagree, and depending on which questions Jennifer has listed,
it's about to happen next.
It's probably going to happen. But I find no fault with that episode whatsoever. It's a joy to rewatch. I've seen it 3 times now.
Here.
I didn't rewatch the entire season getting ready for this podcast because I didn't have time. Instead, I rewatched Those Old Scientists twice and another episode several times, despite the trauma it caused me.
Oh gosh. Okay. All right.
So we're getting up to sort of the second half of our podcast here. We're getting toward the end. So I'm going to focus on just one more of my questions. And that kind of goes in line with what episode do you feel was the one that kind of maybe missed the mark, or you wish they had done more with or gone a slightly different path with?
Guys, I mentioned earlier that I had an experience with this season that was really difficult for me. And certainly I believe that I'm in the absolute minority here because everything that I've seen, all these things that I've read, seem to indicate that people really enjoyed this particular episode. And I struggled so much with it. And that is Ad Astra per Aspera. That is the courtroom episode for anybody who may have forgotten. It is that Una was on trial for being an Illyrian, and very much in the theme of sort of, Star Trek. We talked about Star Trek theme episodes earlier, right? And one of those themes is a courtroom. Like a courtroom episode is something that happens often, and it is often, it's immediately compared to the other courtroom episodes that have happened. There was the first one was an awesome episode in the original series, putting Kirk on trial. It gave us a lot of exposition about the character. We learned a lot about his background, his history, his accolades, and then also, had this really interesting episode sort of unfold. A Measure of a Man, which is one of my very favorite episodes of all Star Trek ever, which is the episode in season 2, I believe, of Next Generation, sort of defining the rights of Commander Data, Lieutenant Commander Data, who was being forced to go under an experimental procedure, basically, by Bruce Maddox, who, he wanted to decline because he felt like Maddox hadn't done the prerequisite work. He wasn't ready for it, basically. And the episode was beautiful. It was a real episode about the rights of Data, about what human rights are in general. An allusion was made in the episode directly to slavery. That was in season 2. It was the first season where Guinan was on board. Picard, losing the battle, ends up in, sort of drinking and talking to bearing his soul to his bartender about what's happening in the trial, and she gives him this advice, and she basically helps him to find that it's a real issue of ownership of property, that Data and anyone copied after him by this very sort of wide-reaching legal declaration would then become a race of slaves. And so it brought up slavery. It basically evoked this feeling of this civil rights, social justice campaign in a format of a legal setting where we, the audience, going into it, we had enough time by that point to adore Data, right? We were already dealing with hating Pulaski. This was season 2. Season 2, where Pulaski comes in and immediately makes everyone dislike her because she's prejudiced and racist against our very favorite android. And that was where we were. We really loved Data as an audience, and we were of course on this side. And they were making an allusion to slavery, and we all got to feel really good about that. I think that this episode is on such a false premise. Again, I feel as though they are trying to accomplish exactly that. They're trying to do an uplifting humanitarian social justice experience where we all get behind it and cheer. And I am not against this. I want to do it. But you chose everything wrong, in my opinion, to get us to do it. And I do truly believe, because that's kind of how Strange New Worlds works a lot, is that, remember I said earlier, I believe that they sort of want a scenario and they just kind of build stuff around it to get that scenario that they want. And I know that they want that scenario of us, doing the very altruistic, beautiful, wonderful thing that we all love about Star Trek and championing a cause for the underdog. I'm there. I am a diehard Trekkie. I'm 100% there. But everything about that made me not want to root for this person. Because, first of all, I think the premise of it being like they basically invented a species for the sake of this to be this underdog that we're supposed to root for, who's not born with whatever this thing they're being prejudiced, the prejudice is being lobbied against them for. It is an elective thing that they do. They are augments. They go and augment themselves on purpose. And that is not illegal. It is simply just goes against the charter of the Federation. So they can't be Federation members and they can't join Starfleet. We're not attacking them. We're not going to their place. Do you see how I say we? Like I'm in Starfleet.
Well,
This is how,
Captain Merrick.
yeah, this is how attached to Star Trek I am. But we are not doing that. The Federation is not seeking them out and punishing them. That would be a very different discussion. The everything that they are doing is elective, and you could say, and obviously they have their own planets, right? Like their planet was super fancy and like not downtrodden in any way. They go to their planet or one of their planets to enlist the help of the lawyer who is on this planet of Illyrians.
I just wanted to clarify one thing. In the episode, it does seem to imply that they were put upon in some way because of these augments. Do you remember that scene where they imply that like they were put upon and somehow we were treated poorly?
Well, it was because the Federation isn't like one part of space, right? The Federation expands, they recruit new planets, they recruit new members, and Illyrians were living on a planet that was either colonized or absorbed into the Federation.
Right, and they could either go to Illyrian places or try to hide and stay in Federation places.
Well, allegedly they were
definitely
welcome to stay because they lived there, but the problem was the people who also lived there that weren't augmented took issue.
Right, and that is the crux of this, because in the story, which again, there's multiple layers for me to feel like I want to complain about this episode. One is on the stance of this championing this cause, this big social justice cause, and we're all supposed to cheer for it. I have my problems with it, which is what I'm explaining now. The second is the legal perspective, which is hysterical to me, because the actual and I know this is in the future, it's the Federation Court, it's not our own rules, but if Legal Eagle were to go and tackle this episode, it would be hysterical, because the episode, I mean the crux of the argument is you're here in a court martial because you lied and have broken this code. Like the code itself is not on trial. This is not that place to do that. Like we can have an argument about that, but it's that you lied. That's literally it. Like that was the only charge levied against her, was that she's been false this entire time. And there's a scene in it just before we get, and this is why I brought it up, because you asked about all of the hardships she had to endure. She got to explain her hardships for one reason, because she was on the stand, and the lawyer starts to say, "I want you to tell me everything about like why it was hard for you." And the opposing lawyer was like, "Excuse me, like that's not what this is about. Non-relevant." Which is like totally valid. And her response is, well, since she's on trial for being an Illyrian, then it just means that you all need to know what being an Illyrian, like what she's being charged for, because you have to understand being an Illyrian, which is, of course, nonsense. She's not on trial for being an Illyrian. It isn't illegal to be an Illyrian. It's illegal to have lied, and that was never in dispute. So from a legal perspective, annoying, but then she goes on to talk about the hardships. And listen, I'll be the first one to say, bullying and ostracization, which is literally 90% of what we're talking about, is bad no matter what the context. And I'm fully willing to explore being nice to people, even if they're doing things that you think that they shouldn't do, right? Like, but that's not the stance that this took. The stance is very aggressive against the Federation, and I had a really hard time being sympathetic for somebody who was sitting there. They said I was young, and the other kids who were normal and were not augmented were mean and bullied me, and the lawyer was like, "So, but how did they know to bully you?" And she goes, "Well, some of us have immune systems that glow. We were given augmented powers that kill all disease, and they glow really cool when they do that. So it's like, am I feeling sorry for Superman? Like, am I just supposed to feel really bad because you were given superpowers as part of your, what? It's not even religious. They're part of their cultural practice, and other people don't like that because they can't have it. That's literally part of the reason. And this is the real issue I had with the episode, was that was part of the reason that it was never even touched on. The actual crux of like what makes this a delicate issue was never even brought up. They never even discuss it. Not even the opposing lawyer. The whole thing that was said about augments being bad, all of it. I just rewatched the episode. The only thing is that it could give you the propensity to want to take over the galaxy. And we've seen it before in the eugenics wars. That's freaking it. Like literally nothing else was said about like the inequality of like, first of all, this is real. We're about to see this in our own society. There is the ability of genetic engineering is literally around the corner and is happening in some corners of the world where it is not governed by the same ethics that we have here. This is going to be something that exists. When it does exist and somebody can be born with a better immune system or better eyesight or better vision or better hearing or a longer lifespan or whatever, like there's a lot of really interesting nuances about level playing field or availability or quality or who can have it when and why. And there's so many in competition and there's so many things that are real issues that, and here's where it gets like crazy making, is that it is explored in Deep Space Nine, which is like 100 and something years in the future of this. And they never even touch on this. And then the finale, like the salt in the wound at the very end, was that she's not a victim at all. She was the one who told on herself. She threw everyone under the bus. Everyone knew that if that happened, it could cost Chris his commission, her best friend La'an, who spent this whole time worrying that it was about her. Like everybody that knew about it ahead of time, suddenly in trouble. And for what? Her big impassioned speech was because I was tired of feeling alone and hidden and I wanted to feel good about myself. Well, you've spent an entire career in there in Starfleet hiding this, and then you find the one crew ever who finds out about it and is nice about it. And that's when it's unbearable for you enough that you literally throw everything to the wind and just chuck it out there. And somehow everything works out okay. But like plot holes aplenty. Like they shouldn't have worked out okay. He should have gotten in trouble for that for sure. He broke a lot of rules. She broke a lot of rules. It seems to me like it was a very like she knew the rules going in. She thought that they were wrong. She lived a life of doing it, hiding it, and then just threw it out there when she decided to cause all these things. And it didn't even create a law because 100 years in the future, we still believe that it's a bad idea. And at the end of that episode, we all are still believing that it was a bad idea, that we probably shouldn't be augmenting people left and right. So I think that this episode had a good heart and meant well. I was really on board with it, but they picked, in my opinion, the worst example to portray this episode.
It's true. I was confused when I watched this episode. I kind of watched it on the surface level, and I found myself excited, and I was cheering, and I was like really into it. To be fair, I really was, and I got kind of whipped up with what they were doing. Um, but when I really like then thought about it with more of a magnifying glass of like, okay, well, this was great theatrics and I got really into it and I like Una. So, of course, I want to, like, I want to go down this road. But I think when you really, like, get into what it was about and what it was saying, it does kind of all fall apart. And Merrick kind of explained all of that. I think my biggest thing is that I feel like this episode had a lot of potential to go into genetic engineering as a really cool court case that we could have really analyzed, and analyzed in response to what are dealing with in our current times. And they kind of just they focused on something that didn't really make sense. And at the end of the day, I didn't really find myself feeling like it's true. Like, I don't think of Una as somebody who is weak or any of that. Like, she's a very strong person, and I just
Her immune system glows.
right, yeah. So I just didn't know. I don't know if hers glows, but I just
It does.
didn't
It does.
see.
We saw it in season 1.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
that's
totally glows.
true. So I just didn't. It didn't really make sense, and I wanted the episode to be better than it was. And yeah. So anyway, Marek said most of my things, so I'm just gonna pass it to you.
The word that
All
comes
right.
to mind is sanctimonious. It just felt so
See, I
sanctimonious.
wasn't that
So
far. Like, I didn't feel as strongly in that direction as Marek. Like, I'm definitely more in the middle because, like I said, like, I enjoyed it in the moment, but I just was like, oh, but no.
all right. So we finally get to give an example to the audience of Merrick and I disagreeing.
How
And
dare
and
silence this man?
respectfully so. But I liked the episode when I first watched it. I didn't love it, and I do agree that the courtroom stuff was ridiculous in terms of like, yes, if you just tried to tell the story of being an Illyrian when you're on court martial for lying about your credentials and your background, it's just gonna get dismissed or like upheld by the judge, and you'll be told to stop talking. But ignoring the technical issues of courtroom procedural type stuff, I want to make my defense, and I wasn't taking any notes while you talked, Merrick, so I won't address all your points, but I do want to go through a couple of points that you made.
There were
Uh,
17 points. I would like a
I
response to
picked
each
out
one.
on 4 big ones, but the first one that I want to come to is when you talked about like how it kind of all got thrown away at the end when you find out that like Una turned herself in, and like how do you feel bad for her when she threw the crew under the bus kind of thing.
Mhm.
Um, I have a very different interpretation of how this came to be in that episode. And again, it's an interpretation. I'm not saying it's exactly what everyone feels, but I liked that aspect of the episode because I think if you're willing to uh like reinterpret the interactions you see, Una has been hiding this secret for a long time. And I equate it to something like uh people serving in the military before Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed. Um
Mhm.
Like you have this secret, you and back then it was technically legal to serve in the military, and that's why Don't Ask, Don't Tell existed. But whatever. It's a similar scenario where she has this secret, she can't tell anyone about it, and for her it's like actually illegal. And I agree, she did break laws, like very clearly. Like that's not even up for debate in this episode. She broke Starfleet code and probably Federation law and whatever else. But she got away with it, right? Because she's the type of Illyrian that doesn't have readily available or readily visible augmentations until the episode in season 1 where she has like her glowing immune system. But when she turns herself in, I think it's because if you live with this kind of big secret long enough, it just continues to weigh on you and weigh on you. And I don't want to say that they made a good case of explaining that she had a breaking point or anything. They didn't. But when she turns herself in, she explicitly told Pike not to help her. Please don't go try to get this civil rights attorney that is also Illyrian. Please let me just face this. She tried to accept consequences and could have, had he not intervened, like a good captain would. Obviously, I'm not blaming him. But if he hadn't intervened, she probably would have just been successfully court-martialed. She wouldn't have had to like give any of the crew members up. She would have been probably kicked out of Starfleet, almost certainly sent to jail of some sort, and that would have been it. Like the throwing the crew under the bus thing comes about because of Pike's good intentions to figure out who in Starfleet is doing this to her. And so I think that actually sets up this interesting scenario where she couldn't keep her secret any longer for whatever personal reasons she had. It was just too big, it was too much, and she tried to do what she thought was the right thing and was willing to face the consequences. And it was actually Pike's actions that forced this sort of civil rights approach instead, because it was the one defense he could come up with for her that might like allow her to like at least face minimal punishment. So he goes and gets this attorney who's famous for taking these cases, and specifically he mentions famous for taking cases where she can basically try to attack the Federation. And I understand how uncomfortable that makes all of us Federation fans feel. But I don't think I blame Una for this. I mean, sure, I blame her because she, joined Starfleet by lying about who she was, which I actually do stand behind. But anyway, so I think that scenario is a little bit more interesting than just she threw it all away for basically nothing. Um, and I actually put the reasoning behind the scenario that we end up in on her and Pike. And again, both of whom I think in their minds were doing the right thing. He was doing the right thing by trying to not let his crewmate be betrayed or face consequences that he didn't feel were just. And she was trying to turn herself in and face these consequences without involving her crew.
That's actually that's a good point. I guess my argument then moves from like behavioral, from like what she did, to like personal, like why she did it and when she did it, because I think that at any other point in her career she might have been able to get away with exactly that. She waited until she was at a ship full of people that knew and would never allow her to go to prison, right? So like there wasn't,
Really,
that
right?
is
Only
unrealistic.
only
uh
Pike and La'an knew,
i
because like
i
he specifically
suppose.
like basically told her that he would help keep that secret.
But how crazy that she ends up in a situation where her literal commanding officer knows and
But
supports it,
I,
and
in my
also
opinion,
like hid it though as well. Like it wasn't even like it happened at that moment. It happened, I think they said 4 months
well, yeah,
later,
because
which
I
put
think
him in
the
a lot of
episode where
trouble.
he finds out is like early in season one.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway,
I think
but
it's
I
four
think
months.
that might be part of what forces her into this decision, is knowing that you're forcing other people to keep your secret now has got to make that emotionally just really rough on you. If it's a secret you've already felt bad about, kind of thing. Anyway, I don't know. And again, you're right. They didn't do a good job investing us in her personal motivations. And had they done that, maybe the episode would have resonated with you and others who don't like it a little bit better, because you would have been more like on Una's side, kind of thing. But I think
Maybe.
another interesting point about this episode, and this is where I know we totally disagree, and that's fine, is I actually liked that it asked questions about the ban on augments in a slightly different way than the Bashir episodes did. In the sense that if you really stop and think about it, it seems the only arguments I've ever heard, both in DS9 and now in this Strange New Worlds episode, the only reason the Federation has banned augments is because of the eugenics wars. Like, no other argument has ever been made for why it's necessarily a bad thing.
Other
But
than the Bashir episodes, you mean?
well, they also only used the eugenics wars as their example. I mean, sorry, and also like the moral implications of like having a competitive advantage, which I'm going to get to in a second.
That's a
Should
big part.
should an intergalactic federation ban a practice because one race, that even if it was a founding member of the federation, had a bad experience? We're about to, and I know your response is going to be, what about the whole discussion on DS9 about, people are going to feel like they have to get augments if they're available.
Well,
And I think that's a fair and interesting question, but the Federation must already have things in place to account for fairness based on differing abilities, right? Or else there would be a hugely disproportionate number of Vulcan officers compared to like humans because they're smarter and they're stronger and they're logical,
Oh,
kind
but
of a
also
thing.
so many weaknesses, though. I've often thought to myself on because there's like precedents for entire Vulcan crews,
Yeah,
right?
like
Like we've
the
seen that in Star
taking out
Trek, like
the
in Take Me Out to the Holosuites.
or holosuites.
That
Yeah,
would be a very like you would only be able to send those guys on like 10% of missions ever. Like they had to be strictly
To
scientific missions. They have a lot of like lower points in their ability as well as higher
I
points
was
in their
just going to
ability.
jump in there and say the original series actually does a pretty good job of explaining why Kirk ends up being more successful than Spock in many episodes, and it's because of his humanity. So
That's
that
true.
actually is explored in the original series and they really do talk about how they don't make it seem that like Vulcans are as superheroes as I think later Star Trek implies.
okay, but
Well,
either way, I guess the point I'm trying to get to is we don't have any actual evidence that other races can't use augmentation responsibly. Humans didn't, and it drove them to the eugenics wars. And they worry constantly about, oh, people will feel like they have to augment their children or they won't be competitive. But frankly, if it is available, and since the Federation doesn't rely on like currency based economics, it could potentially be available to everyone. And I won't get into like, yes, scientifically there could be big downsides that we don't know about, but like if it could be done responsibly, like it seems like the Federation has put a blanket ban on something because of the hugely negative experience humans had when their culture tried it. And I think that this episode tries to, and possibly not successfully, based on I do agree with a lot of your points, Merrick, even if I have a different interpretation of the episode. I think this episode tries to ask, is that really a good idea? Because like the Illyrians back in season 1, there was a brief explanation that the reason for their augmentations are often because rather than terraforming a planet to fit their needs, they change themselves to fit their environment. That's why Pike can't breathe on the planet that he goes to visit with the lawyer, but she can. Is like they didn't
yep.
change the environment to make it breathable. They changed themselves to breathe whatever that environment was. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Is it reasonable to ban all augmentations because of this horrific thing that happened to humans? I don't know, but I
Well,
think it's worth
It
discussion.
I think that's what I was hoping the episode would be more about because the way the courtroom went, it just didn't seem to get into that really important stuff. Like, I feel like some of that needed to be touched on in some way, and it wasn't.
I mean I agree, except I think they, and again I think I agree with you. They didn't touch on it as directly as I'd have liked, but I think the point is if you're in this federation that has this terrible like institutional memory of like the bad experience of the eugenics wars, and you make this seemingly reasonable decision that we shouldn't allow this because look at how badly it can go, you do risk the terrible experiences the Illyrians have. And yes, in this episode they did a terrible job of justifying their augments. Had Una been growing up on a planet, well, that would have been tough because then how would the Federation people have lived there? But had it been that
Yeah,
the
if she had to grow
Federation
up among the
colonized
Federation, it'd be both.
terraformed a planet where Illyrians had already adapted themselves to the environment, it would have been a more clear cut case of you're prejudiced against these people who were trying to do something to help themselves survive in the same way that the Federation would like terraform a planet before they move in.
So
Um,
these are really great points, and I love that you said a moment ago that you think that this episode asks the question, is it a good idea? My immediate response to that and immediate problem with the episode is that it didn't ask a question at all. It was so heavy handed. There was no room because this is, I think, what this discussion proves, period. I mean, this at least I think we can all agree on is that it is clearly a nuanced discussion. This is a really complex issue with a lot of sides and the best treatment from science fiction and Star Trek, in my opinion. Again, this is totally subjective, but the best treatment of something like this, in my opinion, is to offer all of those perspectives, make us all think, and then walk away from that more informed and more intrigued and more willing to discuss various sides of it than we were before. But that wasn't my experience of this episode at all. It was very, very specific. I'll read you this was written by a reviewer from one of the episodes, or from like a site that reviews episodes. Um, it says, in placing number one, Starfleet and the Federation on trial, Strange New Worlds exposes the prejudice at the heart of Gene Roddenberry's Utopia. That is a very upsetting thing to hear, because I expected, like, that's the kind of thing that I would want to be more. There's obviously a lot more complexity to it than that, and it was definitely portrayed in a way that that was the response that we were supposed to have, and I really feel like it was. We were supposed to go, oh, poor Una, and the Federation is totally wrong and totally cruel, and we're being so prejudiced. But there really are a bunch. There's a lot to consider. Like, consider this. What if China, right? I'm from America, and we have, strenuous relations with China at the moment. What if genetic manipulation became a thing? What if in space, from species to species, somebody genetically enhanced somebody to be like the aliens from Brekka, and they had like the ability to like pulse beam people with their hands, and you were giving them weapons? Or what if you were at war with somebody else, or you were just making somebody so stronger and stronger? This is the Federation, remember, this is the 2300s. The technology that they have, if they really wanted to augment, would be extreme. And it would set a precedent that one could continually augment and re-augment and re-augment into a place where it becomes incredibly dangerous. There would have to, even if it was allowed, there would need to be sanctions and rules. There are sanctions and rules on weapons. There would, not just for fair competition, which again, like the military is such, right? She went through Starfleet, um, uh, even if you, like you said, Azure, that there were some sort of grounds already built for differences between species, right? When they're comparing, we have different people in the Federation, like Klingons and Vulcans, that are stronger, etc. Even if those are in place already, she would have been treated as a human, and she went through all of Starfleet potentially faster, stronger. We don't know the extent of it. And even if she was able to get away with it, like she said, some other people were not. If there was no sanction, no oversight whatsoever, and this was completely allowed, there's like, we know the galaxy better than anybody in the world of Star Trek. It would be rampant and aggressive, and it would turn into something crazy. Uh, we would have a crap ton of cons running around. It would, and they would be weaponized, and there would certainly be at least reason to have a very reasonable debate about this. I think my ultimate complaint that I could levy about the episode was that it didn't allow room. And this is really perfectly tying back around to my complaint, remember, that I said at the beginning of this discussion of our podcast as a whole, that I think that one of the beautiful things that Star Trek used to do is give you a lot of different perspectives and then allow you a lot of room to think and to make up your mind. I felt like this was telling me exactly how I should think about this, and that it didn't bring up any of these other very interesting and nuanced points about this discussion, and there was no room for interpretation at all.
I mean, so there, I will agree with you. I think they did a poor job of making this sort of what's it called, the phrase that, well, it's a courtroom phrase, but they also throw it around in The Measure of a Man, like the adversarial process, where
Yep.
like remember, oh God, what was her name, the judge in Measure of a Man? She like, or
Oh.
she makes Riker prosecute and says, if I find that you're not like doing your best job, I'll rule summarily against Data.
Yeah, well, that was the great line when Riker refused. He didn't want to do it. He's like, I can't do that. He's my friend. I believe that he's a human. He says, all right, you refuse, and I'll rule summarily. Data is a toaster.
Right, but I mean,
Tell him
but
to report for experimental refit.
I think that's what set Measure of Man up for good success, right? Is that it was Picard versus Riker, who you know are going to both be arguing their best for their side, but still have mutual respect. Whereas this episode came in, and like you said, it led to a really heavy-handed and one-sided storytelling with a defense attorney who doesn't like the Federation and just wants to make her point. And Una even calls her out for that. At one point during the episode, of like, you're here just to serve your message of the Federation is awful for attacking Illyrians.
Yes, she does.
Anyway, but I think had they set it up in a way where it was two sides, like if it had to be, let's say, Um, and I know they couldn't do this because Pike had to stay out so he didn't incriminate himself. But if it was like Pike had to be the one prosecuting Una, I think it could have led to a much better episode because Pike would have been sympathetic but still had to make the Federation side's argument. And that was, I think, the issue that leads to you disliking it so much, is the Federation essentially doesn't get to make a case here
Yes.
No.
Yes.
for
And
their side of the eugenics argument, because that's not what the court-martial is supposed to be about.
that's
Right.
part of the problem, because what the court martial is supposed to be about doesn't really have enough, in my opinion, enough substance to carry a really interesting debate.
Well, and I think that's what makes it so one-sided, is the lawyer for Una's side, whose character name I can't remember, but her childhood friend, is intentionally trying to avoid the court-martial's topic because she can't win that. Which, again, and I know we have members in our community, one of whom is definitely a lawyer, who pointed out how absurd the legal side is, and I agree. But I don't know. I still think the questions the episode underneath the surface asks are really interesting, and we've talked about them here, some of them. But I do completely agree with you that the storytelling side to it was, I guess, the things I find really interesting about it didn't come out well in the storytelling and require you to sort of creatively interpret what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you make a really good point, because Riker, however, reticent he is to play the role, he does it well, right? I mean, like, he makes good arguments. He gains the ability, like, he takes off Data's arm. He really dives into how he's very obviously a machine. He was made by a man. He turned him off in court. There were very dramatic points, and the whole scene about Picard going to 10 forward and getting that bit of advice from Guinan, which kind of changes his tack. That was because he was losing and he felt it. He went in. He's like, it's not going well, and we, the audience, felt like that was true. We watched the other side represented well, to the best of his ability, and then it was fought again in the other side, and even the judge advocate ended up saying, these are questions best left for poets and philosophers. I can't, like, what she basically says is, I don't know, but I'm not willing to make such a far-reaching judgment, because it would be so far-reaching. And it's funny because they almost try that at the end of this episode, because they know they can't make any law. They can't change any law. They're stuck in continuity land. They know for sure that 100 years later, Bashir is going to get in trouble, right? It's still the law. And again, I think the argument represented much better at that point, so they have some sort of better grip on it in the future. But what ends up happening at the end of this episode is that they go, well, that's this technical loophole that you requested, what is it, asylum, which, again, I thought that whole thing was, that I couldn't make myself leave the adversarial process perspective. I could only see this as just being so silly. But they allowed for this technicality for her, and she even calls it a technicality at the end, for her to stay in Starfleet and somehow manage to keep this. They had to be like, we're going to rule in this case and this case alone, based on just the situation of this very unique case, and then let it go. But in real life, that is a precedent for every single other Illyrian or genetically augmented person to request asylum in the Federation. Not just to be a Federation member at that point, but to literally serve in a place of authority in Starfleet itself. It's a crazily, like, broad-reaching outcome, I thought, that they really tried to sweep very quickly under the rug. Again, I definitely see your point, Azure. I think that if you and I came together, we could have rewritten this episode in a way that still accomplished what they were trying to do, and have done it better in a way that we could both feel good about it. What I'm trying to say is, I think it's possible that this episode, there were ways for this episode to be done about this topic, because my initial premise was they were trying to do a trial episode for the underdog, and they picked the wrong thing to do it for. While I still think that's true, I do believe that there were ways that we could have come together to come up with a story development that would have at least had us both be okay with it.
Let me immediately give you my 30-second pitch for, it's probably not even going to be 30 seconds pitch for what that episode should have been. It should have been a young Illyrian actually applying to Starfleet, being denied, trying to appeal it because they want asylum, because of actual persecution somewhere, maybe not even from the Federation, but applying for asylum because of their augmentations, the Federation holding a hearing to decide if they let them in, and Una ends up revealing herself there voluntarily to try to advocate for this individual.
Someone pay this man some money. That is an episode that I would 100% have gotten
You're
behind. That is
absolutely
a
right.
way better way to have done that. I would stand up and clap if you could see me. That 100%. That would do it. That was a
And
way better
literally,
way to
that
tackle
came
that.
out of my brain because of the points you made. So I do, again, we disagree about the episode, although I do agree with almost every point you said about it. I just feel better about the episode than you do.
Asher. I love the way we do
No,
this.
I
It's
really,
so
I
good.
love that. I actually really love that whole idea, Azure. That was
And also, if
brilliant.
someone at Paramount really does want to give me money, feel free.
Yeah, no kidding. Copyright.
Okay.
I'm so glad we got to have this discussion. I've been looking forward to our opportunity to sort of talk about this one in particular. It literally and truly is the only episode of Strange New Worlds that I have disliked. Every other episode, I'll be like, man, that one was a little bit more lackluster. The Gorn episode in the first season, like there are certain things that I'm like, it wasn't bad, you know, Star Trek, but it was kind of lackluster Star Trek. It was just like, it's not great. This was the only one that had me walk away feeling like I felt in a lot of episodes of Picard, just sort of like dismayed at Star Trek and what it's trying to do in that moment, like whatever it's trying to convey. I just felt like it was really heavy-handed, and I was being talked down to in a very sanctimonious way. And I'm not used to feeling that from Strange New Worlds, so it was very jarring. But I
I
feel
can
like we've
understand that
made
point of view.
peace. We've solved it for them. They should have made that episode.
I was just trying to.
I need to know your least favorite episode, though, Jennifer.
Oh, I don't actually have one.
What after all this time?
And we're getting it close here. But I wanted to think about the whole concept of talking about the eugenics. With we don't want to create more cons and the whole like whatever they overlords or whatever they were called. But if you think about that, for every Illyrian who may do things in a reasonable way and it doesn't seem like they do any augments that are really bad, there's going to be a Ferengi who's going to be crazy and is going to try to take over the galaxy. So there you go.
But the Ferengi aren't in the Federation, so they're going to do it anyway.
We can end it there with the hope that someday we see the super augment Khan Noonien Singh Ferengi, and I'm so excited for that moment. Bring back the whips!
Oh my god.
Okay,
Honestly,
so
I'd be down for a Lower Decks episode where they find the augmented Ferengi.
oh my god, that'd be the best. He's dual wielding whips. I just want to go over, I'm just going to read them all out, the things that I think are also really worth noting about this season. And then I'm going to ask one final very brief question of each of you to wrap up. So I want to bring up some things that weren't talked about. One, Klingons, the complete revision of Klingons. This is a big thing for this season. They made several changes to them. Well, I think very beautifully adhering to the franchise that it came from. They can't completely wipe Disco. It's literally from Disco. So what they did was the head's smaller, but the ridges on the forehead go back farther. So that's the compromise. But they have hair. So that's the next compromise. They have smaller teeth in their mouth so they can speak more normally, and as a result of that, or at least connected to that, their personas, their personalities are so much more Klingon than they were before. Like they're that jovial, meme sort of Klingons that we knew and love. So that's another thing. But then the language that they speak that was dramatically reworked for Disco is still those sounds that they were making then with smaller teeth. So they have somehow managed to really marry the two Klingons together in a way that I think was completely successful. The next one,
thought about that. I like that.
Yes, it was a beautiful harmony that they did. They knew they couldn't stay with that. The Klingons were ridiculous, but they had to stay true to them in a way. I really looked at them top to bottom, and those are all the things. So really cool. And the uniforms reworked everything to bring it closer, but still have ties. Next is the evolution of the characters in the show. Kirk, still here, feeling better about him. I actually think the episode Tomorrow, which we did not talk about, I loved that episode, and I felt like it was a really great development, not just for my man Kirk, who I like way better the more I see this man. Okay, I do. I started off really not caring much for him as Kirk. I'm liking him more and more, but my big surprise from that was La'an's evolution. That character character has grown dramatically from season 1. I think she's phenomenal now. She was so
Yeah, she
rigid
felt
and
very
two-dimensional.
two-dimensional in season 1, but I think that
Exactly.
episode did a lot for her.
It did, and it continues to echo going forward. We've seen it echoing from that point on. That was a big turning point for the character. So evolution of La'an in this huge way. Next is Chapel. Chapel is what? Leaving to go to Corby? Can we talk about the significance of that? Corby ends up being her, like literally her fiance. She does leave the Enterprise. She leaves the Enterprise and gets engaged to this man, spends all this time, and then comes back later. So there really is precedence for her leaving the ship, and having this relationship with somebody other than Spock. So that brings up the next one I wanted to bring up, which is T'Pring. T'Pring continues to evolve, going from this really one-off, terrible character from the original series to, I kid you not, one of my favorite characters in Strange New Worlds. I think that actress and the character portrayal are stunning, phenomenal. The next is Erica. She's evolved as well, getting so much more screen time. They even meme about it in the show. She's getting to do more, talk more, go on away missions. She's growing on me too. I wasn't so sure about it in the beginning. I like her a lot now. It's absolutely great. And then finally is Pelia. Pelia, which was basically I was going to use her as a really interesting example of a very cool character, a phenomenal actress who has all of these interesting ties with all these characters across the Star Trek universe because of how old she lives as a Lanthanite. So she's very fascinating, but I think she represents sort of why this modern sense of storytelling kind of drops the ball with Star Trek. And it's not even Strange New World's fault. It's just that when you told stories back then, they were 45 minutes to 50 minutes long, and there were 24 of them in a season. We're getting less than half of that. We are getting 10 episodes a season. Character development is hard, especially because it is a partially serialized storytelling, and they have to shove in tens of thousands of dollars worth of CGI and action in like basically every episode. So like, let's just sit around a small coffee table and get to know each other, which there was a ton of in like The Next Generation, just isn't there. So there's been some complaints about Pelia, and I don't even think it's her fault. I think she's an interesting character. It's going to take a long time to really explore this. This is a real paradigm shift in the way that Star Trek stories are even told because of this format. So those were the...
I have a solution.
And then of course, okay.
I have a solution, and this would actually fix, maybe, as long as the writers are on board and they have the content, this would fix my one real complaint about modern Trek, is that we don't get those slow burn, poignant, moral, ethical, philosophical discussions. So you just replace 90% of the action scenes with people discussing things. Two
Sitting at 10
talking
forward.
heads. Yes,
Oh,
please.
imagine
or
if
sitting and playing poker.
imagine if in episode 1, instead of seeing Mbenga and Chapel fight for 10 minutes, we had a discussion.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Thank you. That was the other thing I wanted to bring up. The like egregious fight scenes, which are never worth it. That one in particular, but we see a lot of them in Strange New Worlds. First of all, that's not why we're watching the show. I don't care. Second of all, it's not believable. The fight scenes look awful. I'm sorry. I love you guys, and your production value is phenomenal, but the fight scenes are long and drawn out and awkward and slow motion. And I get that that's kind of in line with Star Trek. It's cringy fight scenes. It's definitely a thing, but we don't need 10 minutes of it. That was insane. That one episode, that was way too much. I didn't need to see that at all.
I wouldn't have minded like one brief fight scene just to show what was going on, but
And that's how it used to be.
It'd be like watching a warp core calibration for 10 minutes. Like, just get to the next plot
Exactly.
point.
And-
Let me know that it's there. Yeah, I want to know it was calibrated. I want you to calibrate
And
it. Okay, Rutherford would be very upset if it wasn't calibrated, but I don't want to watch the whole calibration.
And they did have good fight scenes. Like, they did have fight scenes even in the original series. I mean, the Gorn fight scene.
Double
But
fist
it
punch.
didn't-
Oh, wait, sorry. Did you say Gorn? I mean, ear clap.
But it didn't last that long. Like, I'm all for a great fight scene in other movies. Like, I enjoy them. But that's not what I'm here for in Star Trek. And it's funny because I just rewatched the finale episode, and I thought to myself, a lot happened, but also not a lot happened. And I think it was because of how much
Good way of putting that.
Gorn scenes, like the horror portion and the, oh, I'm looking at that and this is around the corner, and oh, the you know, the suspense and the intensity building and all of those things are great, but that's just really, it's
So
not what
I,
I
I
would
wasn't,
prefer in Star Trek.
and it's not for me either. But that's the end of my admittedly longer than I meant to ramble. And then the weird moral trauma issue that happened in Under the Cloak of War, which was extreme and deserves its own
Yeah, we're
podcast
coming back to that.
for it by itself, because that is literally one of the craziest things I've ever seen in Star Trek, and it literally, and I mean that. And the way that they left that, unbelievable. I'm actually shocked. It better come up again in the future. I have no idea. And then finally, Hegemony. We finally, after 2 seasons, gets the full-grown, fully threatening Gorn. We get to see what that's like. We've seen Gorn portrayed in a multitude of times throughout Star Trek history, each time a little better because of graphics, CGI, medium that they're using, whatever. This is the farthest now. Definitely came through. Very alien vibe. I thought that they did a really good job with that. Although with you, there are cooler ways for me to have like a big actiony cliffhanger season than that. So that wasn't my absolute favorite. Scotty coming in, which again, very cool to see Scotty. Really loved that we got to see this person coming in. By the way, I saw a really cool tweet that was from Chris Doohan, James Doohan's son, basically tweeted the actor who's playing Scotty now and said, "Congratulations, welcome to Star Trek. Your life's about to change." That's what he said in a tweet, which I thought was the coolest freaking thing. Which again I really love. And then finally, no Cybok the whole season. No Cybok. That was teased at us in the season finale of the previous season. So anyway, there's a million things to go over. I know that we can talk an hour long about each one of those things, but the question I wanted to ask you, those were all of the notes that I wanted to hit throughout this podcast, which we clearly had no time for. My final question to you guys is, what were you hoping for in season 2, and did it amount to what you were looking for? By the time the season 2 is done, do you feel like it was a successful season or an unsuccessful season? Is it heading in a positive direction or not? What do you think? I'll start with Jennifer.
I'm liking what I'm seeing so far. I would say a lot of the episodes were really great for me. I do thoroughly enjoy Strange New Worlds, but I'm hoping for some more pleasant surprises in season 3 with a lot of the same things that I've mentioned are in this podcast. Like, I'd like to see if maybe they're willing to bring some of those things in. But if not, and it just stays with this kind of whimsical sort of offshoot of the original series, I'm also cool with that. I'm okay with where it is in the in the canon and in the storyline and what it's doing.
Makes sense to me. Azure?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to try to keep my answer as brief as I can. I overall like the season. I don't yet know how I feel about it compared to season 1, which I was incredibly excited for. Like, as it ended, I was incredibly excited for coming into season 2. I think the one issue that's leading to my trouble in judging it is, for me, the bookends of the season or episode 1 and episode 10 are underwhelming for me compared to all the other episodes, in terms of, I just don't find them particularly engaging. Like, compared to Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, or even Among the Lotus Eaters, the one where they lose their memory.
Yeah.
I liked the season, but I'm having a hard time judging it as a whole because, again, the very first and the very last episode were not my favorites. So I think I'm excited to see season 3. I don't know what to expect from it, but I'm excited to see what it is.
I couldn't agree more. I think that, like both of you guys, I'm really curious to see where they go. It's 2 seasons isn't enough to know yet, right? Like, one season was done one way, another season definitely had a different feel to it. And then season 3 is going to be what they decided worked, what they decided didn't work, and then choosing a direction to go in. So we'll see. I think whimsy is going to be the word of the day, and it definitely was a very whimsical season, to the chagrin of a lot of Star Trek fans. Not me. I actually thought, like you said, Azure, it was the episodes that were a little bit harsher and more serious that I feel like actually took away from the overarching appreciation that I had for the whole season. But if you were to ask me, would I like the entire season to have been those old scientists? The answer would be no. I want more substance. I think I would like a different kind of substance, and we've said before what that might be. A little bit more, uh, a little bit more scientific intrigue, a little bit more moral and ethical exploration. We'll see. But either way, I'm glad to see that the show is doing well. It's certainly, like they say, all news is good news. Sometimes even the most hated or argued about episode just serves to be very successful for the realm of Star Trek in its entirety. Subspace Rhapsody will go down in history for this. I guarantee you that there were a lot of people who are not watching Star Trek, who are not classic Star Trek fans, who caught that discussion and watched that episode and have listened to that music. And if that ends up with a new generation of musical loving Star Trek fans, I'm only going to be happy about it. So I don't know. I, like you, have a lot of hopes for the future, but in true Star Trek form, I'm optimistic. So we will wrap it up there, you guys. Thank you so much for joining me. Commander Jennifer and Science Officer Azure, you guys are the very best. We are part of a Discord community, the Star Trek Night Shift, and we do a lot of content regarding Star Trek and how it appeals, I think, to the human condition and modern sociological issues. I think that's where Star Trek is at its best. So thank you all for listening and getting this deep into the podcast. If you're still here and still listening, then you are exactly our kind of people, and we love you very much. Please come join our community, get in on the discussion. We do watch parties for new Star Trek and old all the time, and a lot of phenomenal discussion in our community. So we hope you'll be part of that soon. Jennifer and I are going to be headed up to Trek Condoroga this weekend in upstate New York, where there will be Jonathan Frakes, John Delancey, and Brent Spiner doing talks, and there will be all sorts of cool stuff. So maybe we'll see some new Trekkies there that we will make some friends with. But until next time, live long and prosper, everyone. We love you all. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Oh, was it? Yeah, you guys can say bye.
Oh,
Sorry.
bye.
Did it seem like just like a nice... Greetings and felicitations, as Trelane would say. We hope you've enjoyed the discussion. If you've made it this far, we're very grateful to you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share the video. It helps us a great deal. If you'd like to support the Night Shift, we have a Ko-Fi. And to join the discussions, interact with the crew, participate in watch parties, and stay up to date on all of our content, we hope you'll join our Discord. Both links can be found in the description below. We hope you have a wonderful day, and of course, live long and prosper.